Welcome back. It is day 3 of the first East and Gulf Coast port strike since 1977. 3 days in, nearly half of American shipping hangs in the balance as workers vow to stay on the picket lines until a deal is reached. The strike could cost the economy up to $5 billion a day. Joining me now is the Port of Long Beach Executive Director, Mario Cordero. Mario, thanks very much for being here this morning. I know some exports are diverting shipments to the West Coast. What are you seeing? What kind of an impact are you seeing as a result of that?
Well, good morning, Maria. Well, the impact here to the West Coast, specifically the Port of Long Beach. So I'll give you some data here for the month of August, which is our latest TEU container number. For the month of August, we moved 913,000 TEUs. That's a record amount in our 113-year history. So that gives you a insight in terms of what has happened here in the West Coast with regard to the surge of cargo that's come our way, which, by the way, we're able to move that without any blockage or congestion and bottlenecks.
So what are you seeing in terms of your expectations then? Do you think that you'll be able to handle the extra load coming your way?
The answer is yes, only because of lessons learned from COVID-19. As you know, the nation's supply chain was in a crisis during the COVID crisis, that is 2021. So from that, there's been some real positive steps we've taken as ports to make sure that we continue with our fluidity when we have a surge like we're seeing right now.
So what do you think will be the first sort of, tranches of things that people will either expect higher prices for or perhaps expect delays for those products on the shelves? I know that you're taking on more, which, of course, many expect, and it sounds like you're doing a great job doing it. But, I mean, we're still expecting that this will be inflationary and that things will not reach the shelves that we need. Is that your expectation?
That's going to depend on how long this strike is prolonged. So obviously, if it's a prolonged scenario there, then of course what you've described is a possibility for sure. But again, we're all hoping that this strike is a matter of days or a couple of weeks rather than a prolonged scenario. But at least at this point, I don't think we're going to be seeing those consequences. At least at this point.
Well, tell us about your experiences when you were in the middle of a West Coast strike. And, obviously the East Coast and the Gulf ports are complaining they want to be making what the workers on the West Coast make.
Yeah, so we go through this every 6 years, as you are aware. The IOWU and the management here in the West Coast have their discussions every 6 years. So fortunately, we came to a conclusion with regard to that process. So now, of course, a year later, the East Coast goes through these negotiations. Now, in this particular case, what has been unprecedented, at least for the last 50 years, that the union did go on strike, the IOA. So again, we go through this every 6 years. And of course, we all are concerned about worse scenarios. But in our particular case, there was never a work stoppage. Cargo continued to move. And again, eventually the parties came to a mutual resolution.
So what would your advice be to the Gulf and East Coast port workers this morning?
Well, my advice to both parties, the management and the labor unions, is to come to their differences as soon as possible. I think the good news is I think there has been some movement this week with regard to some of the issues that are very pertinent to them. So, again, my advice is that if this is prolonged, this is going to be an existential threat to the nation's supply chain. So that's not the scenario or the situation we want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a lot about the perishable goods that will go bad. I'm talking, about groceries and beef and pork. Do you expect that sort of to be the easy, obvious issues that people will face? And what's the next tranche of goods that you think will be vulnerable?
Well, first of all, again, you're correct. If it's prolonged, that's going to be the first thing you're going to see. In terms of additional goods, I think you're going to talk about scheduling delays, higher costs, and of course, we're coming into the holiday season. So the good news for the West Coast, a lot of that cargo that we note for the holiday season has already been advanced. I mean, the shippers make these decisions in terms of they're not going to take risks. It happened to us a year and a half ago. They start moving their cargo to other gateways. And in this particular case, like I said, the 913,000 plus is a historical amount. And when you add that to the Port of Los Angeles, which is our neighbor here in this gateway, it approximates 1.9 million TEU containers that have been moved here in August. So that September number that's going to be coming up here soon, I expect a similar type of number.
Interesting. So you were, and the LA port were expecting that you would have to take on more load and have been preparing for this. Mario, Vice President Kamala Harris has voiced her support for the union. She wrote this yesterday: "This strike is about fairness. Foreign-owned shipping companies have made record profits. The longshoremen deserve a fair share of these record profits." Nearly 300 trade associations, however, are urging the president to invoke Taft-Hartley and stop the strike. But Biden says he will not invoke that law, acknowledging that some impacts of the strike yesterday. Watch this.
We're getting pushback already. We're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting product they need because of the port strike. And look, there's a consortium of basically 6 owners that control all the ports from all the way to the East Coast down around the Gulf. And they've made incredible profits, over 800% profit since the pandemic. And the owners are making tens of millions of dollars in this. The last thing they need is to profit off of this. It's time for them to sit at the table and get this strike done.
Mario, what about that? Do you think that Taft-Hartley should be, executed here, implemented?
Well, at this point, again, we're only days into this strike. So I think, again, I tend to be pretty optimistic that this is not going to be prolonged. So if that's the case, then of course we don't have to think about options that have to be taken. So I'll leave it to the administration in terms of how they assess this scenario as we go forward. But again, I think that every sector goes through these negotiations in terms of management, employers, and the unions, and fairness in terms of wages. We've been seeing that in the last 2 years, specifically here with various sectors of the workforce. So I think this has been no different. So at this point, I will defer to the White House with regard to what those options are if it's prolonged. So at this point, I don't see we're there.